ability to better oneself has always amazed me. To take a piece of clay and to mould it into something better. To hold the ugly in your trembling hands and form the mess into magnificence. There is something to be said for such a feat. After all, progress is important. Sameness is boring. My transformation began at around age 13 as the acne multiplied on my face and back, and the testosterone began to leak from every pore. The live wire of puberty was trying to kill me bit by bit, though I wasn't going to give up without a fight. And so I forced a different kind of change. One that was dependent not upon nature itself, but upon willpower alone. The veins began to show, and the striations pulsated with every repetition I struggled through. Past the pain, through the soreness, I continued on. I knew right away that I'd found my one true love: bodybuilding. My father was a surgeon, and it was expected that I would follow the same path. All of those years of schooling, however, were not very appealing, and even beyond that, an interest in the medical profession was not one that I shared with old Daddy-O. I didn't care about heart transplants one bit. I saw myself on stage, oiled up, under the lights, living my dream. My parents didn't realise how very dedicated I was until I wanted to trade out my dad's old sand-filled weight set for a standard-sized Olympic one. For my 16th birthday, it was all I asked for. My father's reply: "Sounds alright to me, I thought you were going to ask for a car." Vehicles and girls, however, were going to have to take a back seat for the time being. Lifting weights was a lot safer anyways, and easier on my mother's blood pressure, obviously. I was not lacking in discipline whatsoever. I juggled my schoolwork with my training very carefully. One would not fall beneath the other. Though this regiment didn't leave much time for anything else, I wanted to be the best at whatever I did, and that type of thinking always comes with a price. Still, I continued. I studied all the greats: Reg Park, Arnold, Frank Zane, but I have to say, Ronnie Coleman was always my favourite. He was an absolute freak of nature, a fucking monster among men. I knew I would never get to a height such as this, but even a tiny morsel off of his plate would suffice my appetite. I wanted more, no matter what it would take. At 17 years of age, I began to set my sights on my first amateur bodybuilding competition. I realised very quickly that the life of a true bodybuilder was not for the squeamish. But it wasn't the training that surprised me. I was already used to that. It was the goddamn diet that hurt me. Eating clean in order to gain weight was such a task, a real job in itself. There is just only so much pasta and so many egg whites a person can eat before they feel like exploding. The odd jobs I worked in the summertime barely paid for the grocery bill. But it was just another price to pay towards the goal I was after. Now, the plan was to bulk up for 6 months and then to cut for 4. I did it by the books. Naturally, no cheating, because cheating is for pussies. I skyrocketed from £145 to £185 in that bulking phase. The first part of the plan was achieved with success. Unfortunately, after that is when the real work began. In order to do well in the competition, I was looking to get around 5% body fat, even less if I could. My calories were cut in half. Boiled chicken breast became my friend. Training intensified and reps were increased. I was in hell, and the 7th circle of that hell was the competition itself. No amount of study or so-called preparation was adequate, as I found myself on that stage being visually picked apart by the judges and audience. I'd visualised it so many times in my mind as I posed in the mirror, in my own bedroom, relaxed, front double biceps, side chest, but it all still paled in comparison to the real thing. My muscles strained with each pose to the very verge of cramping up completely. The nerves attacked me, making me want to throw up what little contents existed in my shaking stomach. But still, there I was, at my very best, a dehydrated 165 pounds, shredded, covered in layer upon layer of spray tan, and ready to pass out. I was deep in the moment, giving everyone the best that I could, but it was simply not enough. I was looking to place in the top 3 at the very least. I was not even close. Backstage, I was devastated and knocking on the door of a nervous breakdown. My folks watched me from the corner of the dressing room as I held back the tears. Failure was not something I was used to, but I just had to know. How could I have placed so poorly? What did I do wrong? Before we left, I went up to one of the judges and simply asked him. Even if it hurt like hell, I wanted the truth. And without pause, he gave it to me. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. The vascularity is there, the tone is there. You don't look half bad for your first comp, but there's just more to it. It's the symmetry and proportion. Think of it in terms of a butterfly. If you were to fold a butterfly in half, its wings and design would match up perfectly. See your bicep on your right arm as you flex it? Nice developed peak. On your left, it's not so much. It almost runs flush into your shoulder, probably at least half an inch in size difference. It's kind of the same with your delts and your traps. They are huge for your size. Amazing. But they make your shoulders look a little small, and your quads are not developed enough, and they don't match up with your upper body. It's fine tuning that lets you place well in a competition. But you know, that's going to come with time and experience. Keep at it, kid. You'll do fine. Bullshit. I knew right at that very moment I would never step onto a stage again. There was no way I was going to be able to surpass that level of effort I'd put in. I was not a butterfly, and never would be. And so, I left that dream behind. I instead began my 13-year voyage to become a surgeon, just like my dad. Bachelor's undergrad degree, medical school, residency. It was quite a mountainous terrain I had to climb, but I knew that I would do it. Hell, there was no other choice. As I began to delve into my studies, however, the words that judges said to me would not leave my mind. The butterfly, the symmetry, perfection. My interest eventually returned and I began to lift the weights again. I studied more and more about musculature, not only human but animal as well, the connectivity, the beauty of it. I wanted so badly to mould again. I needed to shape something amazing. I just wasn't sure how. Not yet. Not yet, at least. I didn't really make any significant headway until I began to attend med school at UCLA. Undergraduate was a breeze, but this was something different. The difficulty level was at a maximum. Between schoolwork, lifting weights, and a part-time job bussing tables, I could barely handle it. I dreamt of quitting the whole thing daily. My parents were so excited, though, that I was going through with it. They decided to pay for a rental in Culver City, which was only about 15 minutes away from campus. It's a decent house for sure, but I was most interested in the basement. It was sectioned off into two halves. One half I would use for my weights and amenities, and the other half for my studies. In full transparency, I had, indeed, began to experiment a little. On my own time, of course, which there wasn't much of. I used roadkill mainly, but I didn't mind. I had to start somewhere, and dead tissue was the best option I had. I began practicing with anastomosis, which is the connection of veins or arteries through the use of sutures. Of course, with the animals being dead, I had to use a saline solution to pump through the modified ducts to check for leaks. This took a very long time to get good at. I also spent a lot of time on the connections of the muscles and joints, both the tendons and ligaments, and how to rejoin such things to bone. Squirrels, chipmunks and rabbits were the usual patients, though every once in a while a groundhog or even a small fawn would find their way onto my table. I chalked it all up to practice. After all, I was going to be a surgeon, right? Why not get a head start? Thankfully, I already had everything I needed in-house at UCLA. I would simply take them out of house. I stole items from the labs every single day I attended to use for my weekend experiments. As we all know, items from the medical field are not cheap. I made sure that I still kept up on my physique somewhat, no matter how lackluster it was. Besides working at home, I attended a few gyms in LA to stay in the scene. I didn't have the money to pay for multiple gym memberships, so I would most often piggyback as someone's guest to get in for free. Most people don't have a problem with it, but every once in a while someone would turn up their nose in disgust as if I had the plague. No matter, even though my initial dream was dead, I still wanted to be around it. I observed intently, but not like I used to. I now watch these men and women as the judges would. I tore them apart, muscle group by muscle group, and marvelled at their shortcomings. But that was the point. They all had shortcomings, just as I did. Not one butterfly was to be found at these Californian havens of the egotistical. I was in good company. Maybe perfection does not exist in the real world after all. However critical I had become, it was impossible to ignore the strengths of some of these characters I was becoming associated with. There were a few in particular who I was truly impressed by. My mind would race back to my younger self, playing with action figures in my parents' living room, removing the arms and the legs of one and popping them on the torso of a different figure. It was the same here. If I could somehow take the very best attributes of some of these gym rats and combine them all, then the formation of a true butterfly would be nothing but a pre-planned conclusion. Unfortunately, these men were not comprised of plastic, but instead of flesh and bone. Thankfully for me, I was becoming quite experienced with such things, and so the idea was born. My first specimen was chosen mainly for his pectorals. Around the gym we called him Big Larry. He had those big, thick, striated bastards that would not be denied. Of course, his favourite exercises were the bench press and cable crossovers. He really had it down too. At the end of each muscle contraction he would pause and hold until the veins were popping out and the pecs were fully engorged with blood. It was truly a thing of beauty. Unfortunately, Larry also sported a thick black mullet on top of his head with a matching moustache. He was stuck in the 80s for sure, but I tried to ignore his style choices as best I could. In no time at all, we were hanging out together at my house, maxing out on the bench, drinking beer, and listening to Van Halen at full blast. I will never forget when I finally took him. 455 pounds. It was just slightly out of Larry's reach, the bar lowered to his chest, but simply never came back up. "Spot! Help! What the fuck?" Oh, I heard him all right, but I backed up to the wall and watched him struggle. The zipper on his fanny pack jingled as he tried to wiggle out from underneath. For some weird reason, I thought that the sheer weight itself would make him pass out. But after about half an hour of watching him attempt to escape, I I knew I had to intervene. A single £10 plate to his mullet sporting skull did the trick perfectly. He ended up back in my newly soundproof lab, tied to a chair with duct tape over his mouth. He was a little messy, but alive. I even stitched up his head wound for him. I didn't want him dead, for Christ's sake. Well, at least not yet. Jonathan was next on the agenda. I was after those arms of his. 19.5-inch biceps were nothing to sniff at. Perfect peaks mixed with a thick bulbous triceps and cannonball delts. He was the one who all the ladies would gawk at. Sexy too, Italian, jet black hair and quite the smooth talker. Funny fucking thing though, because after hanging out with him for a bit, he divulged to me that he was gay. This actually helped me though, as it gave me another ruse to use in my grand scheme. It had been 3 days since Larry had first entered the lab, and it was a real pain in the ass keeping him breathing. Speed was important. As soon as I professed my attraction for Jonathan, the kink and the circumstance of the situation had the man at my doorstep with a bottle of wine in tow. Within 2 hours, I had him nude on my bed, passed out from a mixture of Rohypnol and GHB, which was carefully spooned into his wine glass. It was a disgusting situation to have to carry a 190-pound muscle man down 2 flights of stairs into my basement with his nether regions flopping against my back, but that soon proved to be the least of my worries. As I opened the door to my laboratory, I saw it instantly. Larry's chest was no longer moving, and his skin was now a bluish grey. Oh fuck. Did I forget to feed him? Regardless, he was gone. After removing the restraints from Larry's deceased body and dropping the big bastard into my portable freezer, I put Jonathan in his place, tied to the chair. Keeping the specimens alive for as long as possible was very important. As the tissue died, so did the odds of my masterpiece coming to fruition. And if they did expire, cold was the only thing I could think of to stave off the necrosis. Sure, rigor mortis would surely fuck things up a bit, but the stiffness wouldn't last. There were ways around that. There were certain chemicals that I simply did not have access to, being only 3 years in at school and not in an actually fully functioning hospital. Bottom line, I was out of time. And because of this unforeseen death, I figured that I had about 2 days or so until Larry's contribution to the experiment would be rendered completely useless. And I still needed my missing piece. The thought of another failure crept into my psyche. I simply couldn't have that. Not again. I'm a hard gainer. It just takes me more effort for me to build muscle than the next normal guy. It's genetics, really. Where I have real trouble, however, is in the leg department. My dad has skinny, chicky legs. So does my mom. It's a curse. So when I'm at the gym and spot a person who looks like they could squat a Prius, I take notice. This is where Mark comes in. He didn't skip leg day. He just skips every other day. His flaw was his upper body, but he didn't care. He was more of a powerlifter type. He got off on how many pounds he could move, not on how he looked in the mirror. My plan for him was a simple one, and one that I had been concocting for weeks. Mark was under the impression that I had a pretty amazing squat rack I was looking to sell, and as soon as I mentioned it, I saw the gears in his brain began to turn. When I realised that poor old Larry had expired, within 20 minutes I was already on the phone with Mark, telling him that someone else might be interested in the rack. "Oh bro, don't do this to me! Fuck that dude! Let me grab it today! What's your address? I'll bring my truck!" The panic began to dissipate as I heard these words. Maybe all was not lost after all. I could spot the sunlight glinting off the top of Mark's bald head through the glass before he even reached the door. He had the look of a bulldog in heat. It was apparent that his plan for the day was to get this rack home and put everything together by evening. I imagined him in his house all alone, loading the bar with 45-pounder after 45-pounder, with a piece of raw meat hanging out of his mouth and the blood dripping onto the floor. Just one of those guys, I guess. As I guided him to my cellar door so we could retrieve the non-existent equipment that he was so interested in, my heart began to pound, faster and faster. I almost felt sick. It was a moment of truth after all. As Mark began to descend, I kicked at the middle of his back as hard as I could, and he tumbled down the entire flight of concrete stairs. His head was bleeding very badly. I pounced onto Mark like some sort of animal, but to my amazement, he was still conscious. He was able to get off quite the punch, which ended up cracking my jaw and sending me sprawling to the floor. Some of my teeth click-clacked as they rolled across the cement, leaving their own tiny trails of blood. In complete survival mode, I grabbed the closest thing to me, a rubber workout band, and lunged at Mark once again. I was able to quickly take his back and wrap the band around the thick bull's neck. I tightened it as hard as I possibly could. My muscles burned as I thought back to those same type of searing pain sessions I felt all those years ago when I bared my ass to those judges in failure. It took a while, but eventually the breathing ceased and the man's limbs fell limp to his sides. At this point, Mark's death was purely an afterthought. All of the pieces were in place now. Surgery was already scheduled. A skilled professional, I am not, and have never pretended to be. But I know enough to make a sculpture, and that was all I was looking to do. The butterfly didn't have to reach the air exactly. It just needed to flex its muscles for the crowd a bit. But it was not to be some amateur hack job either. Jonathan watched me from his chair as he cried and cried, and I made the most precise cuts I could, mostly scalpel work. Of course, when it come to the connective tissues, 3 specimens from 3 separate gyms in the area. I knew that they would catch on eventually. I just needed a little time to complete my work. Schooling was over and childhood was long past. I worked incessantly, using sutures and stitching and dermal adhesive to put the pieces back together, until time eventually flew away and Jonathan too died, either of malnourishment or pure terror. Not sure which. That was alright though, as the arms was to be fastened at the very last. Anyways, the lab though was a bloody mess, and I was now a creature of sickly habit, writhing happily in the puddled crimson I had created. After what seemed to be eons of searching and putting my plan into action, the day of unveiling finally came. The external artificial heart was already pumping the modified saline solution through the arteries and veins, and the 2 separate batteries were on standby. Each electrode was placed accordingly onto each appropriate muscle. The human butterfly itself was mounted up vertically to a wooden tabletop with its arms raised and clamped into a pose, along with the other fastening points of the neck, waist and legs. The entire contraption was then tightly secured to the brick wall behind it, although the skin was grey and somewhat necrotic and some of the surgical connections were a little crude. The true spirit of the experiment remained. I spoke out loud to my specimens as I thanked Larry for the gift of his torso and head, which I had shaved especially for the occasion. I applauded Mark for his powerful legs and fighting spirit, and appreciated Jonathan for his amazing arms and ability to suffer to the very end. Without these men and their sacrifices, none of it would have been possible. And so, with my heart in my throat, and the sound of the authorities pounding down the kitchen door upstairs, I hit the switches on the batteries and the show was underway. Standing there in the corner of my makeshift laboratory was the most complete bodybuilder to ever grace the stage. Under flickering lights, the human butterfly hit the front double biceps pose with ease as each muscle trembled from the voltage shot directly into it. It was symmetry. It was proportion, and it was beauty. I was Prometheus providing the flame. I was Michelangelo admiring the chapel ceiling. But, unfortunately, my masterpiece was never meant to last for long. Smoke began to rise from the creation, and my nostrils were met with the stench of burning skin and hair. A few moments more and the flesh seams broke apart, with the pink salines mixture beginning to spurt forth about the room in every direction. Eventually, the pieces of my beautiful butterfly began to melt away and putrefy into the floor beneath them, forming a translucent pile of stinking human mess. I was on my knees with my arms raised to the heavens as the first officer burst forth into the room. I screamed from the bottom of my lungs at him. "I've finally done it! I have seen perfection."